Hi guys, I'm back with another tarot unboxing and a deck review for you. So I'm really excited. After our first video, I got 50 new subscribers, and it's my goal to just continue to, oh hi, to grow this channel and hopefully get another 50 subscribers after this video goes up. You can show your support by sharing this with your friends, and I would really like to continue to bring you these tarot unboxings every week. So the deck that we're going to be reviewing today and unboxing is the Lost Tarot of Nostradamus. Now, this is a new deck to me. I just found out about it, although this deck did come out in 2012, but it's still very much available. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did actually already open this box and already filmed this video. But when I was doing that, I realized that it was pretty confusing as far as how the different suits were laid out and how the different cards were associated. So I felt that it was going to be better for me to sit down, learn a little bit more about this deck, so then I can give you guys a better review and give you my thoughts on it. So this is a deck that's published by the Tuttle Publishing Company. I believe that to be a UK company, and it was created by John Matthews and Will Kingan. So we're going to get into this in just a moment. And Nostradamus is a household name. Everybody knows who he was, at least that he is the most famous prophet and prophesizer if that's a word, I'm not sure, but he was a seer. He was born in 1503, and he was French. And in his early life, he went to the university to study medicine. He became a physician, and he very much was inspired by and following in the footsteps of the Swiss alchemist Paracelsus. So he was also interested in being an apothecary and working with herbs and medicines, as Paracelsus was just 10 years his senior. Now, in time, Nostradamus traveled to Italy, and it was there that he started to become interested in the occult, which I find interesting because a lot of the earliest tarot decks that we're aware of were also from around the similar time. They were late 15th century decks, so it just so happens that that was the time that Nostradamus was in Italy. And at the same time, we don't necessarily associate those earliest tarot decks with the occult. They were considered more to be used as parlor games. But he got very interested in astrology and started doing horoscopes for people. And at that time that he also began to have his visions. And Nostradamus is said to have been a scryer, which means that he was looking at either a bowl of water or at a candle flame to basically put himself into a trance where he could get these visions. And then he wrote out what are called quatrains, which are basically 4-line stanzas. And that was how he set down his prophecies in words. Now, he published those in 1555 in a book that's known as Centuries, and that book is still published today. And, most of the things that he is known for, oddly enough, they seem to be the prophecies of certain tragic events. So even to give you guys a little example from the back of the box here, he is credited with predicting the rise of Hitler, the assassination of Kennedy, 9/11. And as you can see, these are all disasters. These are all catastrophic events. So I don't know why that is that he wasn't prophesizing about technological breakthroughs or leaps forward in humankind or innovations. They all seem to have some kind of cataclysmic sort of concept. But the way that this deck came to be is that in 1994, found in the Italian National Library in Rome was a manuscript, and it's known as the Lost Book of Nostradamus. There's been videos made about it. There's been shows, I think on the History Channel. They made a documentary of it, and books have been written about it. And at the time, it was very, very exciting. Now, this manuscript was accompanied by 80 paintings. and it has been it's been theorized that these were actually painted by his son. But it is also suggested that Nostradamus himself was the one that was directing the creation of these 80 paintings. And the two people that made this deck looked at these works, and they found that there was a lot of imagery in there that looked very much like the tarot, especially some very specific imagery, things such as the Tower, the Wheel of Fortune, that they really could identify. And they presumed that what Nostradamus was doing here was he was creating his own tarot deck. Now, interestingly enough, there's two things that he was interested in, both being an astrologer and being a prophet, which were still allowed and accepted by the church. So as long as he did not actually practice magic, he could still fly under the radar of the Inquisition, and it wasn't considered heresy for him to be doing those things. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this deck. And it comes in this box, and it also comes with a 160-page illustrated book. Now, those of you who know me know that I usually like to just jump in and start using a tarot deck and don't necessarily read the book. In fact, I usually... Yeah, the books, I like to consider that the deck itself is the book, so I don't need any additional supplementary literature to figure out what it is that the cards are trying to say. But in this case, as I said, I did find that the book was helpful to figure out at least how these different cards associated to a standard tarot deck. And the inside of the box looks like this. So the cards come in 2 packets. And they're just wrapped in paper like this. They didn't come in any kind of plastic wrap. So let's go ahead and take a look. Now, the really cool thing about this deck, which had me confused at the beginning, at the onset, but what I did figure out as I started to look at this, the first card that I saw was this card, which is the Prince. And as you can see, it is numbered 14. So why I found that interesting is because by being the Prince, it's assumed that this is a court card. However, the court cards aren't normally numbered. Usually you have the minor cards numbered up to 10, and then you have the major cards numbered from 0 to 21. But the court cards are usually not numbered. And so when I saw that, I thought, okay, well, if this card is number 14, maybe what they're doing is they are going from 1 to 10, from ace to 10 in each suit, and then going 11, 12, 13, 14 for those 4 court cards. And as it turns out, that's exactly what they were doing. Now, this Prince, as you can see, it doesn't really have much of an indicator of what suit it would be. It just says it's the Prince. It has the number here. And it does have this sun up at the top, so I thought maybe that could be a clue. And sure enough, it was, as the next 4 cards all had this similar motif with this arch and the sun up at the top. So we see the Prince, and then we have the Lady, and the Lady corresponding to the Queen. We have the Knight, of course, and then we have the Page. So the Prince here is actually what would be the King card. Now the suit is the suit of the Sun, and this corresponds to the Wands. Once we start getting into the lower cards, we start seeing that the imagery continues to have this arch here, and you can see that there are these 2 stars. And in the 3, you have the 3 stars, and that's kind of the indicator of what number you have in the suit. Of course, you also have the Roman numeral down here. And if you look at these images, what you have is a recreation from the actual paintings and drawings So they are actually pen and ink drawings which have been colored in with watercolor. And then they have these interesting backgrounds, and they're kind of multi-layered. They're almost a collage style deck. And you can see that while this is drawn and colored in, some of the aspects such as this sun up here and this archway are actually added in graphically. So you have a few different multimedia aspects going on here. And a lot of these minor cards, they don't necessarily look exactly, they don't necessarily speak to what the traditional, let's say, Rider-Waite interpretations might be. So it's up to you to know something of these cards already. But the writers of the book did use the traditional meanings of the cards to associate with these. Now, once I started looking further at the other suits, let's look at the next suit. The next suit is the suit of the moon. And when we look at the court cards, what we find is that rather than having prince, lady, knight, and page, we have from the highest ranking down, we have the master, and then we have the prophetess. She is very alchemical looking, looks like an alchemical engraving. We have the initiate, and we have the neophyte. So what you see is that they have different names than the names of the suit of the sun. So we have these more occult type figures for the suit of the moon, and moon is going to correspond to cups. Then we have the suit of the star. And this confused me a little bit, because when we look at the suit of the star, we have the Pope as the king figure, then we have the abbess as the queen, we have the cardinal, and we have the postulate. And these are all religious figures. And so I took that to mean that the suit of the star corresponded to cups, because traditionally it's the clergy that is represented by the suit of cups, especially in older decks, and the suit of wands represents royalty or the ruling class. As it turns out, though, the suit of the star with these religious figures does correspond to the suit of the swords. So you can see that a little bit easier in the aces, where you actually do have a sword here on the Ace of Swords. And you can see the imagery for these cards is really, really beautiful. And so all of these, the suit of the star, you have a little bit more of a religious motif. And you can also see that the arches are different depending on which suit you're looking at. They're just stylized differently. One thing that I really like about this deck is the fact that the imagery goes all the way to the edges of the card. So whenever you're doing a tarot spread and you want to have all of the cards laid out, I like to look at them as one composite picture. So when you don't have that white border around the outside, what it actually lends itself to, if the cards actually bleed all the way to the edge of the card, is that you can put the images together in a little bit more, that you can integrate them together a little bit better than having that white border separating them. And then finally, we have the suit of the spheres. And you can see they have this, what I believe to be an astrolabe up at the top, an astronomical tool. And the court cards are the alchemist, like him, for the king. And then we have the astronomer, and we have the astrologer. So we have the astronomer mapping the cosmos, and we have the astrologer using that information for divinatory purposes, and then finally we have the apprentice. So we have a whole different range of figures that are represented in these court cards depending on which suit. So I thought that that was very cool. And you also see in the suit of the spheres corresponding to pentacles, of course, that you have these different designs of sacred geometry in the back of the figures. So you can see that in the background, the different platonic solids. There's the dodecahedron, and then there's a tetrahedron. Let's take a look for a moment at some of the majors. And in the majors, you see really where they were able to derive the connection between the images that came with this manuscript and the tarot that we know. So here is the card of the Fool. I thought this was very interesting. You see the Fool is leaving a tower. Now, I always like to think, what was happening to the figure before you find them in the image? So even though the Fool is the 0 card in the deck, even though this is the card that lies at the beginning, it doesn't mean that the Fool just one day blinked his eyes and magically appeared at the beginning of his journey and he was setting out. No, he was doing something before that. And so it's interesting to see that what this card implies is that before he set off on his journey, he had to leave the tower. So that can indicate that he had to leave behind some old structure that was no longer serving him. And I'm just going to cut the deck randomly and see who we see here. Well, we have the Justice card, and the Justice card in this deck is numbered 8, which means that those 2 cards, Justice and Strength, have been transposed. That means Strength will be the 11th card. So those are the 2 cards that we see switch back and forth depending on the deck. And here we see a monk. He's holding a rose in one hand. That would represent like the balance in the normal Justice card, and the scythe, which would represent the sword. So the heart and the mind, the emotions and logic being balanced in justice. Let's take a look. Then we have, well, here's the Death card, and a pretty interesting image of death there with this crescent, this horned crescent up above. Here's the tower. It's called here the Burning Tower, and that's a very recognizable image. And then we have the sun, of course. Let's take a moment to look at the back of these cards. So here's what the back looks like. The back is very cool. It has sort of this Fibonacci spiral there, and it's the same no matter which way you turn it, meaning that it doesn't give any indicator when you're doing a reading if your cards are going to be reversed or upright once you turn them over. Now, as far as the quality of this deck goes, one thing that I want to say is this deck is extremely inexpensive. Most tarot decks fall somewhere in the range of around $20. And this deck was actually only $10. So considering the fact that it comes with a book, and still it's a very inexpensive deck. Now, sometimes that means, of course, that you are going to be sacrificing quality. And these cards are, they're not the highest of quality. They're printed on heavy paper, heavy cardstock, but they're not specifically coated. They're a little bit glossy, but they're not necessarily going to be the kind of deck that has a super, super long lifespan. Actually, I did find that when we put all the cards together, the deck itself seems to be really thick. So the paper thickness, is there. You can see, but that can actually make it a little bit difficult during shuffling. But I think that these cards would shuffle okay. I haven't tried shuffling them yet, but like I said, the quality of the cards, this is the kind that after a lot of use, they will have a tendency to kind of get scratched. So they won't last as long as, say, one of those more plastic coated decks. But I found the imagery to be very, very cool, and definitely I think it's interesting to see some of the collage elements there. Now, one thing that I will say, especially for the minors, is that you are going to have a pretty clear understanding of how to read Roman numbers, Roman numerals, because for instance, here we see the 6 of moons. Now remember, that's going to correspond to the 6 of cups, but you're going to have to look at this because there's not anywhere on here where it's going to have the word 6 written out. You're going to have to know the Roman number, and you're going to have to put that together here if you're not already really familiar with the imagery. And it can take a while to get really comfortable with the imagery, of course, of 78 different cards. But overall, I think that this is a really, really interesting deck. One other thing that is neat that is in the book of this is that the creators have actually taken the different stanzas from Nostradamus's prophecies, and they've paired a couplet with each of these cards. So it's been newly translated, and they've put, it's kind of like a little secret key, a little two-line phrase to go along with the cards, so you can use that to get some deeper understanding. A lot of the imagery of this deck is very religious. However, it also has a lot of astrological aspects and alchemical aspects, so he was clearly merging together those different things. Overall, I think that this is a very, very beautiful deck. It's definitely worth the money. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and you can check out the Lost Tarot of Nostradamus. Bye.